One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. This may sound like a silly concept, but I've realized something about myself. I am attracted to other people who love to help people. Like, it is just like this force of nature that I can't really explain until I get to know someone. And then I'm like, oh, that's it. That's the thing. You know how some people have like this it factor or something about them that you're just like, man, I can't quite put my finger on it. For me, it's people that are motivated and inspired to help other people. And that is exactly what today's guest does. I cannot wait for you to hear my chat with Monica Froese, who is a digital product coach for women business owners and host of the podcast Empowered Business. Monica is somebody that I've followed for a while as she's navigated blogging and now podcasting and just doing really incredible things with content creation. She has two brands. One is Redefining Mom, which is a website for helping women thrive in both motherhood and business. And then she has Empowered Business, which this is the brand where she's committed to empowering 1,000 women to earn $100,000 through digital products. Monica's someone who spent 11 years working for a Fortune 100 company running multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns with really large brands like Microsoft and HP. And now she's taking all of that expertise and providing online marketing education to small businesses that are looking to build a profitable revenue stream through digital products, through her online courses and podcast, right? Like she checks all the boxes. Plus, she was just so much fun to chat with. So please enjoy my conversation with Monica Froese. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited for today's guest. Welcome to the show, Monica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Well, it's always so funny. I always talk to guests a few minutes before we go live, and it never fails. We always start a little bit of a conversation. And I'm like, wait. We have to save that. Like, don't tell me the whole story. But we were just chatting about how our worlds have kind of overlapped and intersected over the last few years. And we can get into that. But I think that you are one of our only guests to have on the show that truly have a background in blogging. You've been doing blogging for a really long time. And so I would love your perspective on how you got into blogging. Is that something that you just always knew you wanted to do, right? I mean, who said when they were a little girl, I want to be a blogger one day? It wasn't a thing.
It wasn't a thing.
How did you get into it?
Well, I wouldn't consider myself a blogger anymore, but it's definitely how I got started. For a while, I called myself the anti-blogger, and now I tell people they don't have to blog. So we've come like really full circle on this topic of blogging. So, I mean, looking back, blogging in its like original form was like online journals. And those I did. My friends were really into that. Like Open Diary was a thing. And there was a Live Journal, I think, was a thing. So that was like a form of blogging. And even when blogging became blogging and started getting a little bit more chattered about online, it was still more like a tell stories about your life type thing. But really what blogging is, when done right, which is what I repeat all the time to my students, is content marketing. So I have this whole thing about blogging. So I started blogging in 2013. My first blog, which still exists today, though we don't actively put blog posts on it anymore, is Redefining Mom. And that was born out of me being very upset about the maternity leave policies in the United States. I started it when I was 7 months postpartum. I was in the throes of really bad postpartum PTSD that was undiagnosed at the time. And I had my corporate career, and I just felt like there's something wrong with how we treat working moms in this country. And I have something to say about it. And I've always been outspoken and opinionated. So I put a blog on the internet, and I started kind of mini rants with no other objective. I wasn't trying to make money. Then the world of monetizing blogs started picking up, because when I started blogging and learning WordPress, there was like 2 people teaching it, super technical. I remember getting very frustrated because, I worked full time too. I didn't have, and it wasn't supposed to be monetized at that point. So I paid someone like $400 to get me started, because I had no idea what I was doing. Now, I mean, learning WordPress is so much easier. WordPress is not intuitive in my opinion, but it's so much easier than it was back then, because people are actually teaching it in a more simplified way. So I did the traditional blogging from 2013 to 2016. And then I quit my job in 2016 to take the business full time. And what really occurred to me, so my background's in corporate marketing, everything I did in corporate was ROI driven, return on investment. And there's some backwards ways that blogging was taught for a long time, which was lead with free content and make money off of sponsored posts. Send people away from your site. So you've spent all this energy getting people to your site, and then send them away on display ads for pennies on a click. And also like affiliate marketing, I thought, but if I'm sending people away to recommend other products, why don't I find a way to bring them in my world so I can own that relationship first and then recommend the product and get the kickback? So from like a marketing perspective, I thought this is a whole lot of work for very little payoff at the end of the day. And I could not see how to grow an actual business beyond replacing my paycheck, which is different. Replacing your paycheck isn't all that hard. I don't want to say that like it's not easy either. I'm not saying that. But I mean, you can blog and replace like an average paycheck, but turning it into a company with cash flow and employees is a completely different ballgame. And I could not see how it was going to be feasible with these typical blogger models. Now, some people do it, but they drive insane amount of traffic.
Right.
And that disconnect between all of this effort to get people to my site just to send them away just confused me. And then it really dawned on me that, wait, blogging when used in a business, not for ranting about, the maternity leave policies, which are very valid. But if I want this to be a business, I have to start with the end in mind. So I backed up and thought, what am I selling? What am I actually going to make money on in this business? And that's where my love affair with digital products came from. So I launched my first digital product, much like I started my blog accidentally. Uh, when I quit my corporate career, all of my working moms on Redefining Mom were like, wait a minute, you are the spokesperson for the right to work and changing workplace policies, and now you quit. So what's going on? I'm like, wait, I didn't quit. I'm going to build my own business. And they're like, well, tell me more about that. And I didn't, the roadblock was, well, I didn't really know how to help them. And I thought, well, step one, like everyone was asking for like, what did you do? I'm like, well, step one was honestly, we came up with a really intricate budget, family budget, because my paychecks paid legitimate bills in the house. Like we needed me to make money. So we have what is known today as the family budget spreadsheet. It was really born out of a need, which is all digital product is. A digital product is a solution to a problem that someone's having. My audience's problem at the time was, I would love to get out of corporate like you did. Please teach us your ways. And I'm like, well, you probably need to understand how you're going to financially afford it. My husband and I put together this thing. I made it into a template and it took on a life of its own, and it's made us a lot of money very unintentionally. And from there, I've launched so many digital products since then, and now I teach it. So it's like, I don't really blog anymore. My mode of putting out free content is now podcasting. And I can tell you like my flash on that too, if you want, but
Yes, yes. Well, before we move into podcasting, because I find this so interesting, I actually want to know a little bit about what the journey was like in creating content. Because there's a lot of people that are starting at a podcast, or they're just now going to be creating their first website, and they're like, oh, this idea of putting out free content, like it feels a little scary. I feel I have to be vulnerable. Like I'm sure all the feelings that we have whenever we're putting ourselves out there. But tell me more about the timeline of you just doing your blog kind of for fun, like how you started with the ranting and everything. And what was the timeline to where you were like, you know what, I could actually turn this into something? Was it years? Was it months? What did that look like?
So I say I had my first daughter at a time when my career was taking off. And I think this happens to a lot of women. That's the intersection. We have kids as our professional lives are also gaining steam. And that could be really overwhelming. So I did not have the time to focus on there was no consistency of me putting out content. It was like responding to things. So for example, one time my friend who I worked with said, are you sitting down? Because I have to tell you something. And she mentioned how Gwyneth Paltrow had just come out with this working moms. She has it harder than the average 8 or 9 to 5 working mom. And she's like, so before you read it, you should be sitting down because I think you're going to be a little hot-headed about this. And I think I opened the blog post response with, excuse me, Gwyneth, but I actually work. Like the reality of working in corporate is not 9 to 5. P.S. And I got picked up by Fox News because of that. After that, I also went, the White House found me and I met President Obama because of my blog. And I was making no money. You would think if you're getting put at a table of 6 people to meet the president of the United States that you must be doing really well. I was making nothing off of this blog. They were doing a working families event and I came up, there was less competition for blogs back then too. So I came up in Google, I guess, for their press people, and it was a really cool experience. But what happened was, so that was going to the White House was about 2 years after starting Redefining Mom. He challenged me and I don't back down from a challenge. So I thought, well, when am I ever going to get in front of the leader of the free world again to give my opinions? I went after things like student loan interest, you name it. And I told him what I thought about how hard it was to actually manage a family in this country. And so he listened to me. And at the very end, he said, you're a spitfire. And I laughed because I am. And then he said, so what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, no, what are you going to do about it? What are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I'm not going into politics. That's not happening. And then after that, my mind just kept exploding with ideas of, no, how could I make a bigger impact? Like if I don't want to go into politics, and I think that we need corporate, like women in corporate who are change makers, but I didn't know how to stick that out and be present for my kids in the way that I wanted to be. And at that time, I didn't even know I was going to have another baby because I felt like I couldn't, honestly. I just didn't know how I was going to manage another maternity leave and all of that. So that was a big conversation in our household about having another baby. And I said, I can't do it in corporate. I just can't go through that again. It was such a dark period for me. So I left the White House and I thought, I'm going to make this a thing. Like, why not? Why can't I make, and that was when the monetization around blogs had really started picking up. People were really starting to talk about it on the internet. I thought I could do this. And then 8 months later, I quit. So it was 3 years after I started, but 8 months after the White House.
Oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. And now this is actually a perfect place to bring up, I don't know if it's your mission statement. I don't know what it is, like what you call it, but tell everybody about is it the driving force behind your business about helping, is it 1,000 women make $100,000 a year? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So it's help 1,000 women make $100,000 a year through selling their knowledge and skills with digital products, which would result in $100 million in the hands of women. And I'm passionate about that because I've heard this can be controversial. I still have a hard time understanding why this should be controversial, but I believe I made a statement on my own podcast that I believe in financial independence, even in a marriage. And that triggered some people. I have very unique experiences in my own life, which has led me to the point where I don't understand the idea of asking like permission to spend money or not having access to my own money, my own retirement accounts, credit cards in my own name to build my own credit. The world functions off of money and everyone needs to have, like I always told my husband when this first started becoming my talking point, and I get it. He was like, does this mean that like, you don't want me around or what does this mean? And I said, no, it means that you could be gone tomorrow. Like nothing is guaranteed. How am I going to take care of our girls if we don't have your paycheck tomorrow, if something happens to you tomorrow? And it's like, I don't know why people always seem to go, when I say it in context of married women, people tend to go to divorce. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. But hey, even if that is what happens in your life, you should be able to take care of yourself if that happens. And I witnessed things where I saw women have to give up their credit cards when they got married, which is bonkers to me. They didn't have retirement accounts, couldn't buy cars in their own name because they weren't building credit, couldn't leave abusive situations. My own brother-in-law passed away in the Air Force when my sister was pregnant. So I saw a lot of things that were just made it so important for women to be able to have that earning potential. And then women do good things with money too. We invest back into our community. And that's just like proven, like you can Google it. and women do big things with their wealth. And so it just really, over the years, I got real passionate about helping other women achieve. And I'm very careful. There's nothing easy about building a business. Like, I think I'm very fortunate with my circumstances. I had a great education. I had a great corporate job. I have a lot of great background experience, but I did build a life around myself where I get to support my students. I have full-time employees who I get to treat fairly. I employ a full-time nanny, and I work about 35 hours a week at this point. I finally am to the point where I don't work like nights and weekends, but I was for a while when I was building this, so, but I never could have been present for my kids like I am now when I was in corporate because my corporate job was too demanding.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to be said about building a business over time, because like you said, there's so many different pieces of it that happen organic. Who would have told you, like in 2013, you're like, I'm starting this blog and you're going to meet the president pretty soon. You'd say, what are you even talking about? Right? Like there's so many
Exactly.
different things along your journey that you just can't predict. And I think so many people do want to have that laid out. Give me the 5-year plan and we're going to follow it to the T and everything's going to happen the way that we think it's supposed to. And it just doesn't work out that way. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. But above all else, I love the mission that you have to help women make more money and, make a bigger impact, because I totally agree with you that I think, women businesses tend to reinvest back into women-owned businesses and in our communities really well. So I think that that's a really good point to make. But I do want to transition into learning more about your podcast. So everybody here loves to talk about, why did you start a podcast? Why did you transition from blogging? But I want to know more about, because I know that you said, you have your blog that still exists. It's out there, but you're not actively posting on it. So was that a decision that you made several years ago? Like, hey, I'm just going to let this live there and start a new brand. Tell me a little bit about how that worked.
So I would say, I had my second daughter in 2018. So I did go on to have another child, and I had contracting support in the business, but I didn't have any employees yet or anything. And at the same time, this is things you can't predict when you start something like this. I also became known as like the Pinterest advertising person for about 4 years in the blogging world. Because of my ROI mindset on things, and everyone was going for the heyday of free Pinterest traffic. And I kept saying, I think paid ads is going to become very important on this platform. So I was one of the first to learn it. My course on that had started taking off in 2018 as well. So it got to the point where putting out the blog posts weren't serving my business. There was no direct ROI to me, and blog posts personally for me, because I can do stream of conscious really well. But I edit myself when I write. So a good blog post and worrying about the keywords and everything. And it was taking me 8+ hours that I just did not have. I had a newborn. I had this course taking off. And so at the time, I stopped putting out blog posts because it just wasn't serving me. And then it turned into, I kind of grew in a weird way in hindsight. I didn't really realize I was doing it, but I made a choice that I was going to put my content creation focus behind the paid firewall. So I was always really good at collecting leads before the paid firewall, but I pretty much was hyper-focused that if you were coming to me, you were going to hand over your email or pay me money. Like that was it. And that's how I teach nowadays too. Those are the two primary modes of how I was going to work with you. So then I would take people on my email list. And for about 2 years, how I really cultivate it was I would write, and it's funny because these emails would take me almost as long as a blog post and yet get seen by less people and only went out once. So, but what it did was email is a great way to grow relationships. And I knew probably about a year into that, so probably mid 2019, end of 2019, I kept thinking I need to have a podcast. Like I knew a talking medium would be great for me, but bandwidth was a huge issue. And I also knew that while I was growing a really great email list of engaged, an engaged community there, I was still missing out where I was writing all these great emails and they were only getting seen. So some of those we did end up repurposing into blog posts once I started realizing that, but that was really all I could manage to put out for content. And I put so much into my paid courses. And when you put out good products, you get good referrals. So I was fortunate in the sense that I spent all my energy pouring into my students, and then the referrals just kept coming. So it wasn't hard for me to sell. Then I decided I was no longer going to do Pinterest advertising. I just got totally burned out after 4 years. And I was really disconnected from the bigger mission. I started redefining mom to help women, working women. And I'm like, now I'm teaching Pinterest ads. Like what? This is so disconnected to me. And I just really, impact is very important to me. And during the pandemic, I had one of those, I thought I was handling the pandemic fine. I really did. I was like, this is great. I love being home. This is like, my life doesn't change that much. I just don't have to travel. I'm not stressed out. About 9 months into the pandemic, I went through some sort of weird depression, and I told my husband after we had just built a house so that I had an office to work in during the pandemic, I'm going to blow up my biggest revenue stream. And he was like, that's kind of crazy. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to do it anyways. And luckily it worked out. But through doing that and coming up with the new mission of how I was going to make an impact, that I knew now is the time to podcast. So it was kind of like blogging was how I did it initially. Then it was a heavy focus on my email list. And then it was, okay, I need to get back out from the paid firewall and really start attracting people in a bigger medium. And podcasting is also a great way. I've always had a pretty solid network. I've always joined programs, and I learned that in corporate. So I just kind of came into my business. But podcasting, wow, it totally opens your network up, because not only I get pitched all day long, but it's just when you get to talk to other people and interview them, and then it's like their network opens up, and then they have shows that you can get on, and it's a great way to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a cool community, like, especially like behind the scenes. Like we were just talking about Stephanie. Stephanie, we're giving you a shout out here. It's like Stephanie has helped Monica with her podcast here and there. And it's like, it's such a tight knit group of people, and you get to meet so many incredible people that are doing amazing things. But like you said, it's like they're super connectors of like, oh, and I'm sure Monica, when we're done here, I'm gonna be like, oh, you'd be a perfect guest to go on this podcast. And you should, reach out to this person because your message would work really well for them. So the cool thing about podcasting is it doesn't feel like everybody's competing with one another. It's a way for all of us to share our messages, because you and I both know everybody has a unique message. Here's Monica. She's the one that started the blog, and she got to talk to the president. Like what, no one else has come on the podcast and talked about that. I mean, it's probably not going to happen, but I think it's just such a unique way to connect with your listeners and really just be able to tell your story in a really unique way. So, first of all, you haven't told us, what is the name of your podcast, so everybody can go run and check it out?
It's called the Empowered Business Podcast.
Okay. And so listeners always love to hear a little bit like behind the scenes. So do you post every week? What is your format? How long are your episodes? Like, tell us a little bit about what that looks like for your podcast.
Yeah. So I'm a perfectionist. And with that means I never would have started this if I didn't give up on the perfectionism. And that's really the point I got to. It was time, if I was going to be launching this new brand, and the new brand is Empowered Business, it was just, I had to make it happen. So I don't know if I really knew what I was going to do when I started per se, but what I did know was that I needed a podcast producer. So that's where Stephanie came in. So through my network, I met with, I knew a lot of other podcasters, and Stephanie came highly recommended. I got with Stephanie. She had a launch package. So this made my life so much easier. I cannot imagine launching without Stephanie. She made my life everything from scripting my intro, finding the music, getting the launch graphics up. What I had to do, I had to make a few decisions, of course, but she said, we're going to launch, I think, with 5 solo shows she wanted me to launch with. That was a lot. I mean, solo shows. So what I quickly learned from those 5 solo shows was, so for me, this is pretty much like doing a blog post. It's a lot of prep work that goes into it. So then I can't remember how I got my first interview. It was definitely I interviewed a lot of friends for the first couple interviews. And I realized, whoa, interviews are so much easier. And P.S., so much easier. But yet people do love my solo show. So I've just I'm 40, I think we're releasing like our 41st or 42nd episode. So I'm still kind of muddling my way through. Cause then I also, I had surgery in June. So I was like around episode 20, like between 20 and 25. And so I was batch recording. And then I also realized that I didn't do a good job in the first 20 episodes at representing diversity, which is super important to me. And so I had a retool right after the surgery. That was a big conversation we were having. I'm like, I did a bad job here, and I want to do better. And so we had to rework that, which meant I was going to do more interviews, because I really wanted to highlight put other women on the platform than women who look like me, essentially. And so now it's like a mixture of solo shows that are I will say my solo shows are at this point very strategic towards what we're doing in the business. So we don't do sponsors. essentially my business sponsors it. So if I do a solo show, it's content creation that I can run paid ads to. It's very strategic content to what's leading into a paid program. I get behind the people love behind the scenes. Like, so I've gone behind the scenes of my 6-figure launches and broken down very, details of that. Right now, I would say we have more interviews out there, and it was born out of this is easier for me to do. So let's do more interviews. But then it turned into, wait, this is a great way to highlight other women and give them a platform. And now I'm really loving that too. So I like both, but that's just what I'm rolling with right now. This could change. I mean, that's the great thing about having a podcast. You can do whatever you want. It's yours.
Yes, this is like such a point I want to hit home, because people will come to me and they'll say, well, I've been told this, or I learned online that, and this is what, like, the perfect way to do this. And I'm like, first of all, there is no magic blueprint to have a Joe Rogan sized podcast. Okay. He's an anomaly. There will never probably be another show like his ever again. But the thing is that at the end of the day, and what I love that you've said over and over again, it's about the message. It's about what is the impact you're trying to make with your show. And I think that whenever you put that as the top priority, so many other things just kind of fall into place. I mean, maybe that's me like putting words into your mouth as long as your journey, but I mean, would you agree?
I would totally agree. Honestly, I didn't launch with the intention of making the charts. I don't believe in vanity metrics, to be honest with you. I don't need to go viral. I would say I've had many instances throughout the years of going viral in like a certain sector, and I just don't care. And maybe I should, I don't know, but to me it is about the impact, and I'm not for everyone. I'm not trying to be for everyone. And so it's about serving the people who I can help and amplifying other people around me. And as long as I'm doing that, and it is serving, because I do have employees, I do have overhead, and I do pay for a podcast producer. So the podcast does have to serve the business as well. So that there is twofold, but I'm not looking, and don't get me wrong, if I ever see myself in the charts, or if I open the podcast app and I'm under, high in my category, I'm not going to scoff at that. That's cool. I'll take it. But I guess it's just not my main objective. And I think maybe that is born out of doing this online world for as long as I have, that I don't think true success is being viral. Like, that's not that. I believe I'm a creator. I don't think I'm an influencer. I'm like maybe a micro influencer to a degree, but not. I don't need 1 million Instagram followers. I really do think even downloads can be a vanity metric. So though I heard that my downloads are pretty decent, but I wouldn't even know. I don't even know what I would benchmark it against. And that's how I always felt about page views too, to my blog. Everyone was focused on page views. And again, to the conversation of, okay, I got 20,000 page views. What does this do for me? Did 20,000 people pay me money? No, great. So why do I care? I just don't care about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that you just gave someone a gift that's listening that has been worried about that, because that's honestly, it's the stats that people don't even have that keep them from even getting started, right? They're like, if I can't hit this metric in the first 6 episodes or in the first 6 months, then why should I even begin? And I think that it's really important for what you just said. It's like, hey, it doesn't matter anyway. Like, if I'm making an impact with my business and my community, like, that's really what's most important. But you also hit on something that I'm curious about, because I get questions a lot, and I'm curious, with you having a blogging background, do you do show notes for your podcast, like on your website, like you would do a blog post?
Yes and no. So we do have show notes for every episode. Right now, Stephanie's team manages it because of bandwidth, but I do recognize we could do better with SEO, like optimizing it so it's like double dipping podcasting and really blogging, because I essentially write myself a blog post for solo shows, and then and we don't fully leverage it right now. It's actually one of the things that's perpetually been written down in my to-do. So I do recognize the power behind that, and I think that's smart to leverage especially if you're putting a lot into your content, to leverage that in the written form on your website to get that SEO juice behind it.
Yeah. And it's kind of a weird dynamic too, because like, I don't find myself finding somebody in Google through SEO and then going to their website and listening on their website. I'm not necessarily listening to their audio file that they embed there, but I'll see it and then I'll say, oh, that's really good. I'll grab my phone and then I'll go listen. So it's a really weird dynamic because people are like, why would I spend so much time to put it on a website whenever I could just do it all in my show notes? But
well, I mean, if your website is built out, then getting an episode found on Google also exposes them to your business as a whole.
right.
You know, so it's also about getting them. And then recently I did, because I do run low paid. I have a pretty decent understanding of paid ads. I mean, I did teach paid ads in Pinterest for 4 years, so I'm pretty good with paid ads. And we run targeted traffic to those solo shows that I do that are very content heavy. And I installed ConvertBox, which Thrivecart bought ConvertBox, because I was recognizing I was kind of going a little bit against my own advice, because really when I bring people in, I want them to do one of two things: get on my email list or pay me money. And so I was driving this traffic to the podcast page, and yes, it was helping. And there's a whole logic behind, once they came to the page, now they're in your retargeting pixels. But I was like, I need to do a better job at getting these people that are coming to an individual episode onto my email list. So now we're using ConvertBox, and that's been going very well. I just started it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I don't have a lot of stats behind it, but heck, it's more email subscribers from that traffic that I was getting prior. So that's something I'm really also in the mind of. If I get people from outside sources, whether it be targeted paid ads or our SEO starts taking off on our topic, how am I bringing them into my world? Because you still, even if they listen to the episode on the webpage, or they go, to Apple, and you still aren't controlling the relationship. Like, you don't have much ownership over that relationship. And I do think that's a very important part of growing a business. The more you can own the relationship, the better.
Well, and to that point, you said something earlier about, your podcast is your main source of free content. So do you make calls to action in every single episode to have people come sign up for something that will get them on your email list?
Pretty much, yes. I would say the two major things that we say are DM us on Instagram, because Instagram's been one of our main strategies that we've been working on this year. And I do answer my DMs, which is a legit thing I do. So it's a great way to communicate with people. And then also our evergreen training is we really tried. I used to have 40 ways to get on my email list between the two businesses. We've really narrowed that in. So Redefining Mom has one main opt-in, and the Monica Froese / Empowered Business side has one opt-in. And that's just, it really simplified everything. Just one way to get on our list. And then once someone's on your email list, the sky is really the limit. That's where you can they can get to know you. And we reiterate our podcast like crazy in our emails.
That's what I was going to ask. Is that part of your welcome sequence when someone first gets into your world?
Yeah. So I've always approached my welcome sequence as a little different than other people, which is kind of also the beauty of running a business. You get to do what works for you. So because I've always had I've had a lot of ways for people to get on my email list. We don't really have one onboarding sequence, but each targeted opt-in sequence, I would say, leads to the podcast. Actually, at this point, we ask people, this is by the fourth email, we're this is what I'm about. This is what you're going to mainly get. Please unsubscribe if you don't want this. And then we get them to the podcast. We send out weekly podcast emails as well. So we're always telling people to go listen to the podcast. So basically, yeah, a lot of we even pretty much decided, we experimented with a free Facebook group again. I closed one down in 2018 out of a bandwidth issue. And I'm it doesn't work for us. We tried again. That was a call to action for a little bit of time on the podcast. Now it's really we want you on our email list and we want you listening to our podcast. And then from there, you'll get to know me enough that you'll decide if you want to pay me money.
Yeah. Yeah. This is great. And I love to hear that you're experimenting with different things. You're not just committing to something and you're just so frustrated with the whole process, but you're I'm going to show up anyway and I'm going to do it because I promised I was going to do it. I love, it probably comes from your mentality of what's the ROI? What kind of impact is this going to have?
Yeah, and consistency, honestly, in my opinion, and I'm assuming you're going to have the same opinion, but if you don't, that's cool too. I can't see how a podcast would be worth my time and effort if I wasn't consistent. Like that,
Yeah.
that is, I, you know, I, when people say, how did you do this? And I hate to say it boils down to consistency. In some ways, I'm like,
Yep.
that sounds so cliche and to a degree easy, but it kind of is the truth.
Yeah.
Showing up every day. I know a lot of people who treat their business as kind of like, well, I don't really feel like working today. It's like, I don't know what that's like. What do you mean you don't feel like working today? I wake up every morning and I have, if it's a work day, it's a work day. And I treat it as if I'm going to corporate. So consistency, I think, is just very important. And so as long as I'm showing up and putting out regular episodes on the podcast, I can experiment with all the marketing tactics around it. Because podcasting is a strategy. I tell my students this all the time. So podcasting is a strategy, but the tactics around it change. And so you can experiment with different tactics, but I know I have to show up every week as the strategy for this podcast to be worth our time.
That's a mic drop moment for everybody that's listening. Like you said it, that was like, oh yeah. And to go back, I think like, isn't it one of those phrases like the concept of consistency is simple, but it's not always easy, right? It's not always easy for people to keep up and keep going. And that's honestly one of the biggest struggles that I see podcasters face is the consistency. So, setting up systems, setting up processes, and then just committing to every week, rain or shine, whatever's going on. It's like, we just got to make it happen.
Yeah, and there are some days that I'm looking at the calendar and my episode's due to Stephanie, and I'm like, but I don't want to.
I don't want to. Yes.
And you just do it. And and maybe that does come. I think I do have a bit of a suck it up attitude to things.
Yeah.
I don't think that everything in my business is supposed to be fun or can be fun. I do things I don't want to do all the time. I think that's kind of just part of life. So that could just be my attitude in general towards things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't expect my business to be my main source of fulfillment either. I think at a time I did, and I think that wasn't fair to the business and it wasn't fair to me because it started as a hobby, and so my husband actually has a hobby that an e-com hobby, and he loves it. And I've warned him because he has a really good corporate job. And I really like his benefits. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to poo-poo you being an entrepreneur, considering, what I've done for the last 5-6 years. However, be aware that when you take a hobby and make it a business, there are some unfun things and responsibilities that come with it that make it not as fun.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Oh my gosh. I feel like I could ask you so many other questions about your podcast, but I want everybody to go check it out because it's so good. So it's the Empowered Business Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. So we're going to have a link to it in the show notes and all the other amazing things that Monica is doing, but we're going to switch gears and transition to some rapid fire questions. So Are you up for that?
I'm up for that.
Well, my first one is, what piece of advice would you give to a brand new podcaster?
I think we kind of covered it, which is consistency. You have to stick to your schedule and show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to what you said earlier. So you said you launched with 5 episodes. Did you record everything before you launched? I meant to ask that follow-up question.
Yes. All 5 episodes dropped at the same time. So it was like a really quick intro episode was episode 1, setting the frame of, I think it was like a 10-minute episode of my intentions behind the podcast, why I started the podcast. And then the 4 episodes, I personally used the things that I got asked the most at the time. And then I also, 2 of the episodes were just my journey over the last 5 years and breaking it down into like bite-sized chunks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good. I was like, I meant to ask that follow-up question earlier, popped in my head, and it just came back to me. So, okay. The next rapid fire question I have is a 2-part question. What is the dream podcast you would love to be on? And who is a dream podcast guest you would love to interview?
That is a great question. All right. So this is cliche, and any PR person in podcasting would tell you this, but I binged Amy Porterfield when I got started. And so it would be like a full circle moment to be on Amy's podcast. That would be pretty cool for me to be on her podcast. So I'm going to go with that, as cliche as it sounds. A dream guest. Oh, there are so many. I mean, we could go big and be like, hey, why not just bring President Obama on? But, but I think where I'm going to, there's a recent show on Netflix called Made that came out. And it's based on a true story about a woman who leaves an abusive relationship. She wasn't physically abused, but the misunderstanding of mental, emotional, and financial abuse was a really big component of this, which plays into my bigger mission of I've seen a lot of financial abuses, especially in the context of marriage, to women around me. And I was fired up watching this 10 miniseries. And then I realized it was based on a true story. And I would love to have the person, she wrote a memoir, and I would love to have her on my podcast to talk to her.
Oh, that's such a good one. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. And it's funny because you said this earlier and I was like, oh, that's one of my rapid fire questions. Do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
Yeah. And I've had to really work on trying to let it go. Perfectionism will stop me for forward movement. I took the Colby probably in 2017. So early on of this being a full-time thing for me. And the Colby, the three major things it measures 4, but the fourth thing I've never really wrapped my head around. But the three major things for me it measured was follow through. Oh, why am I'm blinking on it's like research. It's I can't think of the word that they use, but basically like fact finding is what it is. Okay. Fact finding, follow through, and quick start. And I came up super high on fact finding, but also super high on follow through. The problem is the fact finding and the perfectionism in me stops me from taking action. But once I commit to taking action, I will follow that through. That's why probably podcasting I'm so good at. Whereas my husband is a really high quick start, and I liken it to he throws up 10 plates in the air with one finger left to catch. So 9 fall. And then he looks at me like, what, are you going to pick up my 9 plates? I'm like, I would not have thrown the 10 plates. I would have thrown the one that I was catching, and I would have done great with it. But I can get stuck in that research mode and the paralysis. Like many people who want to start podcasts, I'm sure do. They, all the research that's out there. I also subscribe at this, and I think I've done this pretty well throughout. I find one person, like one teacher that's going to show me how to set up my podcast. And you know what? It is going to be their way. You can tweak later. I just like take one person to listen to, get it up, get it running. And then once it's going, expand your horizons. Like how else can who else can you learn from that's going to teach a little bit differently? But I think the noise out there can really be distracting from getting going.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. Such great advice. Like just so many different things for people that are starting their business, getting into podcasting. You have shared so much and I really appreciate it. So where can everybody connect with you, Monica?
Yeah, so we pretty much centralized everything under monicafroese.com. And then we also have, if you go to monicafroese.com/profit podcast, the way that you spell profit, it's just a simple, it will give you a link to our training, our podcast, and also our Instagram, because I do respond on Instagram and talk to people. So you can message me over there. It's at monica.froese, and tell me what you thought of the episode and we can talk.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was going to say. That should be the call to action. Like everybody go to Monica's Instagram, go follow her and go check out her free resources and send her a DM and say, this was the number one mic drop moment that we had in the episode. We would love to hear what that is. But Monica, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It was such a fantastic conversation. I truly feel whenever I get to the point where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I know we're going to have to cut this off soon, I always feel like saying, can we just go for 30 more minutes? I do. I want to ask every single guest the same question. Like, are you free just for the rest of the day? Can you just block off your calendar and we just sit here and chat about online business all day, because that's how I felt with Monica. It was such a fantastic conversation, and I want you all to go follow her immediately. Go listen to the Empowered Business podcast. Go check out all the incredible things that she's doing. I love her mission, where she just so boldly states that she wants to empower 1,000 women to earn $100,000 a year through their digital products. It's so awesome. And like I said in the beginning, I'm really attracted to people that are trying to help others and serve them so well. And it was such a pleasure to speak to Monica. So go follow her. Check all her information out in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 311. Go connect with her on Instagram and tell her your number one takeaway. We would love it if you would take a screenshot where you're listening to this episode, tag me, tag Monica, and let us know what you thought about today's episode. But that's all I have for you today. So again, the show notes are crystalprofit.com/episode 311. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, "Send Crystal a text message." And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, "Send Crystal a text message." And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.